The first core of the 1000-Year Blood War anime has come to a close. On Monday, the 26th of December 2022, the special double release of episodes 12 and 13 aired, respectively titled Everything But the Rain, June Truth, and The Blade Is Me. These episodes adapted some of the most beloved chapters in the entire series, and I think it's safe to say Pierrot absolutely knocked it out of the park. Episode 13 particularly was a pristine experience from start to finish. The team working on it nailed every single aspect of the production, from storyboarding, directing, sound design, color palettes, voice acting, character design, animation. Even the CGI flames looked astonishing. I am very grateful to have experienced that episode and cannot wait to see how they handle the next 3 seasons. The trailer for the second core, which will be airing in July of 2023, looks gorgeous, and I truly can't wait to see what Pierrot have in store for us, especially with the added content which has been game changing so far. However, today we are not here to talk about how good the production has been. I have a video planned for next week where I discuss the entire first season, the good, the bad, and everything in between. I'll also be doing a podcast with my good friend King Recon to discuss the first season at length, so stay tuned for that. Today we're here to break down the events that transpired within these episodes. We will be dissecting the logistics of this reveal, what they represent for the character of Kurosaki Ichigo, and the ultimate message that Kubo is promoting through this deeply profound revelation. With that being said, grab a snack, get comfortable, and hopefully you'll enjoy this video. Zanpakuto are the weapons carried by Shinigami. The shape and abilities of a Zanpakuto are unique to the Shinigami carrying it. These aren't just ordinary weapons, they are the reflection of their associated Shinigami soul, which is made possible by the construction of Zanpakuto. All Zanpakuto originally begin as Asauchi, which translates to shallow hit, a fitting name considering these are essentially blank and nameless Zanpakuto. Since the birth of Soul Society itself, there has never been a Shinigami who truly awakened their Zanpakuto without wielding an Asauchi forged by the blade god Oetsunimaya. In order to mold an Asauchi into their own unique Zanpakutos, Shinigami must spend every waking hour with it, and in doing so they imprint the essence of their soul onto the Asauchi. And that is why Zanpakuto are not just a reflection of a Shinigami soul, but a part of their soul. You can learn quite a lot about a Shinigami by inspecting their associated Zanpakuto. For example, let's quickly take a look at Kyoraku Shinsui. I'll be discussing manga spoilers for a minute, so here is a timestamp on the screen for you to skip if you are an anime only. Shunsui's Shikai turns children's games into reality, which represents his easygoing attitude and distaste for responsibility. After all, it was the burden of responsibility that traumatized him. A big part of his Shikai is how shadows are utilized, which imply that he is hiding something. And he is. Shunsui has a lot of repressed trauma due to the suffering placed upon him by his sister-in-law. And this is perfectly represented by his Bankai, Katen Kyokotsu Karamatsu Shinju, the theater suicide, which displays the events of his sister-in-law's life like a play, and captures his emotions as a result of that entire ordeal. The stark contrast between his Shikai and Bankai speaks volumes to his character. He uses his Shikai often, and it functions as a facade that he wears to mask his true emotions. We only ever see his Bankai once, at a time where he doesn't want to use it but has no choice. And with his Bankai, his true emotions are unmasked and the facade is peeled back. Shinsui is a brilliant example of a character who is almost entirely characterized through the subtext of his Zanpakuto. And of course, he isn't the only example. In fact, almost every single character in the series is characterized through their powers. Not just Shinigami, but Quincy's and Aranka as well. All of the major power systems are fundamentally similar as their powers stem from the same thing, Reishi. Shunsui was just a quick and effective example of my point, and he has my favorite Bankai, so I wanted to quickly squeeze him in here. Let me know if you guys would be interested in a more extensive analysis of his character in the future. All of this exposition is incredibly important to understand when looking at the relationship between Ichigo and Zangetsu. Ichigo is not your typical Shinigami. He didn't grow up in Soul Society, he wasn't issued an Asauchi forged by Nimaya, he has a hollow living inside of him, and most importantly, his mother was a Quincy. Everything But the Rain is the origin story of Kurosaki Ichigo. There are so many long-running mysteries that coalesce and are finally revealed within this short span of 10 chapters. From Ichigo's Quincy heritage, his hollow powers, why Isshin is in the world of the living, how Aizen knew about Ichigo since the moment he was born, how Isshin knows Ryuken, the truth behind the death of Masaki. All of this is explained in a very natural way. This isn't some sort of info dump where Kubo ham-fists a bunch of half-assed explanations into a last-minute backstory. Rather, this is the pure and unadulterated truth of Ichigo's bloodline, something kept secret not just from the readers but from Ichigo himself. Everything But the Rain is the key to Ichigo understanding himself, and it comes at a time where he desperately needs to know the truth, more so than ever before. He was completely humiliated by Yhwach, the leader of the Quincy's who attacked Soul Society and killed thousands, including head captain Yamamoto. Yhwach essentially told him he's a Quincy, which had Ichigo confused to say the least. And then Yhwach followed it up by telling him that he didn't know anything about himself or even his own mother, which was a very bitter truth for Ichigo to swallow. As Yhwach was about to leave, Ichigo went for one last attack which was thwarted by Jogaram, who broke Tensa Zangetsu clean into two. The fact that this was done so effortlessly by not even Yhwach but his number 2 further emphasizes just how humiliating and painful this is for Ichigo. He is defined by his struggle to protect the ones he cares about, and the tool he uses to accomplish that has just been destroyed. But therein lies the problem. Ichigo treats his Zanpakuto as a tool, but let's hold that thought for now. To repair Zangetsu, Ichigo goes to Mayuri, who tells him a broken Bankai can never be returned to what it once was. His best possible option is to go to the royal palace and get it rehammered by Nimaya. Ichigo is accompanied by Renji, whose Bankai has been incapacitated ever since his fight with Byakuya hundreds of chapters ago. Together they are placed in the Ho or Den, or the Phoenix Palace, another very fitting name as Zanpakuto do function a lot like phoenixes in a lot of ways. The phoenix is an immortal bird that cyclically regenerates or is otherwise born again. A broken Shikai can be regenerated and a broken Bankai needs to be reforged entirely. Ichigo and Renji are surrounded by Asauchi who are very angry at them for the way they use their Zanpakuto, to which Nimaya poses an incredibly important question. Who is superior, a Zanpakuto or a Shinigami? This question continues on the thread between Ichigo and his Zanpakuto, where Hollow Ichigo asked him who is superior between the king or the horse. They are both tasked with overcoming the Asauchi within 72 hours. Simply put, Ichigo and Renji must make the Asauchi submit. They must make them choose him, and Ichigo completely fails. It doesn't help that Renji succeeds given their competitive rivalry. This is the second instance where Ichigo has been humiliated in such a short span of time. Nimaya makes it very clear that no amount of physical strength or time will help him here. He cannot make the Asauchi submit to him through sheer force of will. He cannot push through this obstacle in the same manner he has countless times in the past under the supervision of Urahara or Yoruichi. This time the matter is a lot more personal. Ichigo needs to dig deeper, to understand himself, to go back to his roots in order to understand his Zanpakuto, which is a reflection of himself. How can you understand your Zanpakuto if you don't even understand yourself? And so Ichigo is transported back to the world of the living. Finally, he speaks to his father and learns the truth of his heritage, a conversation that was set up over 100 chapters before this moment. After Aizen told Ichigo he had known him since birth, Isshin told Ichigo that they needed to have a very important conversation, but Ichigo brushed him away from telling him, stating that Isshin should only tell him when he wants to, and he thinks it's okay to tell him. Now is that time. We find out that Masaki Kurosaki, Ichigo's mother, was a Quincy who suffered from hollowification after fighting White. White is an experimental hollow created by Aizen by layering the souls of countless Shinigami, the exact technique that Nimaya uses to create his Asauchi. It's an almost completely black hollow with a white mask, and it's the spitting image of Ichigo's Vasto Lord form that we saw in his battle against Urukyora. To me, the most interesting aspect of White is the meaning behind his name. Aizen chose to name him White, to be ironic, for White has a black exterior but an inner whiteness due to its origin being the souls of several Shinigami. I believe this ironic naming can be applied to Everything But the Rain as well. It's a very sad story which fits the way rain has been used throughout the story, but due to the context of when Ichigo learned this story at a time where he needed to learn the hard bitter truth of his origin, The name works. Like how the hollow is completely black but white on the inside, this story is depressing like the rain. But on the inside, it is everything but that. It is enlightening and frees Ichigo from his depression. In order to counter hollowification and prevent the victim from completely self-destructing, you require a permanent conflicting existence. Essentially, you need the opposite of your species. Masaki was now Quincy and hollow, meaning she needed a Shinigami and a human to survive. With the help of Urahara, Isshin was transported into a Gigai which allowed him to be half human, half Shinigami, and a suitable conflicting existence. However, this came at a great cost. Isshin wouldn't be able to return to being a Shinigami as long as the hollow within needed to be neutralized, which actually spans even longer than Masaki's life. In the anime, there was a crucial line added that fully explains why Ichigo inherited the hollow white. The hollow will not only stay within Masaki for as long as she lives, but it will be passed down to her descendants, to her first child. Considering Isshin is Ichigo's father and blood runs thick, he doesn't even hesitate in making his choice to save Masaki. I really love how Isshin sacrificing his powers here is very similar to Ichigo's sacrifice with the final Getsuga Tensho. It gives all of those moments with Ichigo and Isshin interacting in fake Karakura Town an extra layer and ties them together really beautifully. They really are like father like son. So, Isshin and Masaki's souls were bound to each other, and thus Ichigo was born. The hollow within him merged with his Shinigami powers and became one with his Zanpakuto, which explains the origin of Ichigo's hollow and why Isshin got his Soul Reaper powers back. This also explains why Aizen knew about Ichigo from the moment he was born. In fact, he knew him even before that. Finally, Ichigo understands. He now knows the truth behind his hollow powers, which have always been the source of an unbearable amount of grief and confusion for him. From the very beginning of the story, Ichigo is consistently running away from his hollow powers, and this has a massive impact on him psychologically and emotionally. The inner hollow powers are literally his Zanpakuto, the reflection of his soul, and he is absolutely terrified of them. He wants to get rid of the hollow within, and finally learning that the hollow is a part of his Zanpakuto is what allowed him to break free of this psychological torture. But this isn't the only massive piece of information that sets Ichigo free here. He also learns that Yhwach is the reason his mother was killed by Grand Fisher as a result of Ashvalan, the Quincy cleansing that killed every single Quincy that Yhwach didn't deem worthy of bearing his blood. Knowing it is Yhwach to blame and not himself allows Ichigo to finally overcome the burden of guilt for his mother's death. Finally, Ichigo is resolved. There are no more mysteries, no more indecision, no more confusion or mental instability. He knows exactly what he needs to do and who he needs to direct his anger towards. Ichigo is now absolutely unshakable, and this is wonderfully symbolized by the rain, which represents negativity clearing away with the end of everything but the rain. And thus, Ichigo returns to the royal palace for another shot at making the Asauchi submit to him. He who was dog-walked by the Asauchi, incapable of making them submit to him no less than a few hours ago, is accepted by them instantly. He didn't even need to fight them, he didn't need any physical training, he didn't need some sort of ridiculous power-up, he just needed to show up, that's it. The Asauchi are molded by the soul, which means they function as receptors of the soul. They know and understand exactly what you're feeling, and considering Yhwach's words make sense to him now, Aizen's words make sense to him now, the hollow within that has been eating away at him forever finally makes sense to him now, Ichigo's soul is at peace. And that fact permeates through the Asauchi as they all kneel before him. He walks towards the Asauchi he knows is his and says, "You're the one." This level of certainty tells us a lot about Ichigo here. He has clarity in the fact he can finally understand the source of his inner hollow. He doesn't have to fear it anymore. It's his Zanpakuto, and he embraces that fact. The analogy of the king and the horse is made redundant. Nemaya's questions regarding the superiority between Soul Reapers and Zanpakuto are also now redundant. But still, the most important part of this entire narrative thread is yet to come. Ichigo has learnt the truth of White, the hollow that lives within him. But what about the Zanpakuto that he has communicated with on numerous occasions? What about Old Man Zangetsu? It was established in Everything But the Rain that all Quincy's have the blood of Yhwach flowing through them. Seeing as Ichigo is part Quincy, this obviously applies to him as well. And then the realization kicks in. The old man he sees in his inner realm is not his Zanpakuto, but his Quincy powers. It is Yhwach from 1,000 years ago, the Quincy king who trampled over Soul Society. The truth comes crashing down on Ichigo as we get this hauntingly beautiful monologue that perfectly encompasses how he processed this revelation. Standing face to face with Yhwach during the first invasion felt like being drawn to his inner realm where he speaks to old man Zangetsu. He shut off those feelings and tried not to think about them. He tried to ignore why Yhwach almost reminded him of somebody. And so the rain reappears in the inner realm, the rain that represents Ichigo's sadness. He has a breakdown, he tries to bargain with Zangetsu, he refuses to acknowledge the truth as it is, but being a part of his very soul, old man Zangetsu explains the truth for him. Before we get into that though, I want to quickly explain how this is even possible. The reason why Ichigo can see his Quincy powers and interact with them, despite us never seeing this for any other Quincy, is because unlike them, he is part Shinigami, meaning he has an inner realm where he communicates with his Zanpakuto. This is applicable only to Ichigo because of his mixed heritage of Shinigami and Quincy. There's probably a Yhwach in every single Quincy, they just can't communicate with it because they're not part Shinigami. Anyways, old man Zangetsu states that he is Yhwach, but he is not Yhwach. All Quincy's come from Yhwach as their father, making him Yhwach, but he doesn't share Yhwach's sentience and he doesn't serve him either. There were no lies in his words or his heart. The only lie he ever told Ichigo was his name. And even then he tried to tell him his name at the very beginning, but that attempt was thwarted, which is an insane twist in of itself. As the conversation continues, we see the setting slowly break down, as Ichigo literally and metaphorically sinks deeper and deeper into sadness. Rather than just explaining himself as an individual, old man Zangetsu explains himself using Ichigo's past experiences. It's very important to understand that these internal conversations Ichigo is having are exactly that. They are in his mind, they are like figments of his imagination, but they are very real. Old man Zangetsu lays it all out for him, how he always needed the Hollow White to help train Ichigo, how his life was saved not by him but by the Hollow powers. He never wanted Ichigo to be a Shinigami because being a Shinigami would mean making him his enemy. Like I said, he is Yhwach, but he is not Yhwach. He wants the best for Ichigo, but he's the source of his Quincy powers, which are opposed to his Shinigami powers, so wanting the best for him means not wanting him to become a Shinigami. On top of that, Shinigami and Quincy are fated to fight, and old man Zangetsu didn't want to have to kill Ichigo himself. At least, that's what he originally thought. But Ichigo persisted, he chose to be a Shinigami, and he travelled down that path out of his own free will. And that made old man Zangetsu's heart waver. What was originally an attempt to keep him far away from the Shinigami became support in Ichigo's decision. He feels blessed, joyful, and content to have watched Ichigo's growth and to have supported him along the way. And now finally, it is time for him to step away and stop holding Ichigo back. What Ichigo has been using as his Zanpakuto for the entire series up until this point is only a fragment of his power that old man Zangetsu couldn't contain. The Asauchi he gave Ichigo in the past was something he created through reishi manipulation and a counterfeit, which worked alongside the counterfeit Asauchi that Aizen made with the Hollow White. Essentially, Ichigo had been nerfed for the entire story. And now it's finally time for old man Zangetsu to step away and allow Ichigo to fight with his own power, giving him his true Zanpakuto, the real Zangetsu. And so, in a very similar way to how the rain cleared at the end of Everything But the Rain, the light of his true Zanpakuto illuminates the water, and Ichigo chases after it, literally and metaphorically rising above his depression and gaining peace of mind. Despite everything old man Zangetsu just told him, how he is actually Ichigo's Quincy powers and comes from Yhwach, Ichigo accepts him as a part of his Zanpakuto, and he accepts his Hollow powers also. He reassesses all of his interactions with both old man Zangetsu and the Hollow White and appreciates that they never lied. All they did was help Ichigo time and time again, and so both of them are Zangetsu. Both of them are his Zanpakuto. And this is wonderfully captured by the fact that Ichigo's new Zanpakuto is literally split into two, each of them respectively associated with the two halves. But the most important part of all of this is the conclusion. The name of the chapter, the name of the episode, the title of this video. The blade is me. Chapter 66 of Bleach is titled The Blade and Me. The volume that chapter is a part of is also titled The Blade and Me. They were always separate. Ichigo was one and the blade was another. The king and his horse, the Shinigami and his Zanpakuto. A tool he uses to fight, a means to protecting his loved ones. But that's not the right way of perceiving what is literally the reflection of your soul. And Ichigo finally understands this better than ever before, stating that he will never ask for help, tell them to stay out of his way, or ask for them to fight with him anymore. From this point onwards, Ichigo will fight on his own. Thank you, Zangetsu. You are me. The blade is me. The importance of these words echo throughout the entire narrative, especially after this moment, but I don't want to dive into spoiler territory for any anime onlys that are watching this. But to be honest, we don't even need to. To grasp the weight of these words and Ichigo's acceptance of his Zanpakuto, you can just look at everything before this point. A prevalent trend throughout the cast of Bleach is that everybody is a victim of their past, which heavily shapes their present. They are victims of vicious cycles, be it war, grief, injustice. Almost everybody is plagued by something that ultimately ties into the two most central themes of Bleach. The first being courage to keep moving forward in the face of death, and the second being self-actualization through introspection, to know and love yourself and embrace your individualism despite the aspects of yourself that may frighten you. Being the main character, Ichigo is of course the quintessential example of somebody who embodies these two ideas by the end of the story, and The Blade is Me is the perfect example of both of these ideas. Over the course of the story, we see Ichigo haunted by the death of his mother, which he blames himself for. We see his fear of death, not just the prospect of dying, but the fact that he can see ghosts and is absolutely powerless to help them. We see his hatred towards his inner hollow, which can literally be categorized as self-hatred, seeing as it is a reflection of himself. The hatred he feels towards his inner hollow is resolved here, as he finally accepts it as a part of himself, as his Zanpakuto, a reflection of his soul. He finally knows and loves himself and embraces his individualism despite the aspects of himself that frighten him. The inner hollow, he accepts it even though it's been the source of so much fear for so long. And as for how The Blade is Me touches upon the other central theme of the story, it's just as beautifully profound. Death and Strawberry is the name of the first chapter of the series. At its core, this story is the exploration of death through the lens of Kurosaki Ichigo. Death affects each and every member of the cast. For Rukia, it's the death of Kaien. For Byakuya, the death of his wife. For Tosen, his friend. For Yamamoto, Sasakibe. For Orihime, her brother. For Uryu, his grandfather Soken. For Komamura and Shuhei, it was Tosen. The list goes on and on. And again, being the main character, Ichigo is the character who is the most affected by death from the perspective of the reader. He always blamed himself for the death of his mother because of his ignorance. He never knew the truth of Yuhaba's involvement and his mother's lineage, and that truth sets him free. Knowing it is Yuhaba to blame and not himself allows Ichigo to finally overcome the burden of guilt for his mother's death and transcend. He now has the clarity, bravery, and strength to accept himself, which includes accepting both his Quincy and his hollow powers, which constitute Zangetsu, the reflection of his soul. Thank you very much for watching.